Good morning, groundlings. It's Saturday, is what I would say if I were a vlogbrother. But since I am not a vlogbrother, I am one of the 5 awesome groundlings. I'm just gonna tell you that I'm AJ, and I'm your Friday person. But yesterday, Katie took Friday since she couldn't film on Thursday, and so I'm taking Saturday, so she could have Friday to herself. Our theme this week is favorite authors and books, and I'll start off with the mandatory Shakespeare and Harry Potter reference, but since we're probably going to have weeks devoted completely to them, that I'm just going to leave them on my table for now. Next on my list is The Thief, which is a really great book, and it has a really awesome surprise ending, or I guess twist ending? I'm not sure what term you prefer, but it's really awesome, and it seems like it wouldn't be possible to have a twist ending from the way the book is going, but then, especially the twist ending it has, but then it happens, and you're like, whoa. But the book, it starts off a series, but the book I like best in the series is The King of Atolia, which has a whole bunch of political intrigue stuff, and it's just really cool. I didn't realize I liked political intrigue stuff until I read this book. Both of these books are by Megan Whalen Turner. Next on my list is The Warrior Heir, which is fantasy in a modern setting, which will become a common theme throughout my book stacks. I assembled a stack of books for prop use. And it has a lot of, it's just a really good adventure story. It doesn't have any, like, gimmicks or anything that make you, like, really love it, but it's just a really great book, and I like the story it tells. But then the next one in the series, The Wizard Heir, is also really good, and it starts out with this whole completely different story, but then all of a sudden in the middle the two stories combine, and it's really cool. The third one, The Dragon Heir, is just a continuation of The Wizard Heir, but it also has it has this really cool scene change in the middle, where one of the characters goes to rural Ohio, and it's just very different from the rest of the stories from the previous 2 books, which take place in a college town in northern Ohio, and it's just really cool how it just switches for a little bit. It eventually goes back to where it started, but it's sort of an interesting change of pace. And yes, one of my soft spots for these books is because they take place in Ohio, and I live there. The author for all these books is Cinda Williams Chima, or Chima. I'm really not sure how to pronounce it. Next on my list is Sword of the Rightful King, which is a really great King Arthur story. Although my definitive King Arthur story that I use in my head to think of all the King Arthur mythos is, which I consider the canon one, is The Once and Future King by T.H. White. I like this book because it has a very interesting story, it has a very interesting way that Guinevere and Arthur met, and I'd like to think that it is the actual way they met, not the very simple arranged marriage one described in The Once and Future King. Next on my list is Me Talk Pretty One Day by David Sedaris, which I'm using as representative of all the David Sedaris books that I've read. Since they're all in a bunch of little stories, I never remember which stories are in which books, so I just grabbed this one because the cover is sort of interesting. But yeah, I really like all of these books a lot, and yeah. Next on my list is The Alchemist by Michael Scott, who is not the character from The Office, which you should be able to tell because this book is not called Somehow I Manage. That was an Office joke. If you got it, then you're awesome. But anyways, it's this really good book. I guess it's crossover fiction, with a little bit of revisionism in it, But, I just like the story, and you should just read it. I don't really, explaining it wouldn't really spoil it, but I feel like I shouldn't explain it, and you should just read it. Next on my list is, The Amulet of Samarkand by Jonathan Stroud. I really like this book, and, the other two in the series. It tells a story of an England that is run by magicians as members of parliament and as the prime minister. And, it also chronicles the relationship between, a young boy named Nathaniel and his, djinn, Bartemius. Djinn, D-J-I-N, not the alcohol. And it's just very, the whole Bartemius trilogy is very good. And, yeah, you should read them also, as you should with all these books. Speaking of crossover fiction, I have, the book Here There Be Dragons, which is my favorite crossover fiction in the world. It tells the story of 3 characters named John, Jack, and Charles who go to, who are taken to this archipelago where they meet all sorts of literary characters. And at first, this first story is very straightforward, mostly fantasy, although there's a little science fiction in it. But then, as the stories go on, they just get more and more complicated, and there's like a million of these books, and they're all so big and thick, and there's so much stuff. It's all about, like, they get all this time travel and dimensional stuff, and it's like if a fantasy book turned into Doctor Who halfway through it, although it's spread out over a whole series, and there's paradoxes, and, yes, next on my list is Artemis Fowl by Eoin Colfer. I really like these books all the way through, but after, The Lost Colony, they started to get a little bit cheesy, and I read the next 2, but, this is the 5th book. The 7th book, The Atlantis Complex, was just so such blatant filler that, like, I'm not gonna read any more of the series. After that, I have Fly By Night by Frances Hardinge, which is equal parts political story and a story about books and the awesomeness of books. And the cover illustration is by Brett Hellquist, who did a series of Unfortunate Events, all the illustrations in those books. And it's such a good book, and there's a twist in this one too. And this is one of my favorite books. I could read it over and over. I mean, there are some books that, like, after you read it once, like, you know the plot too well to just reread it. Harry Potter and the Chamber of Secrets was like that for me. Like, after I read it, I didn't want to read it again. But a lot of these, even though it was a phenomenal book, but so many of these books, I would be all too eager to read again as soon as I have time. There's the rub. Next on my list, Marianne talked about this, The Martian Chronicles. I was thinking that I would be the one to talk about it because I didn't realize that anyone else had read it enough and it had stood out enough for them to think it was awesome. But Marianne stole it from me. She stole mentioning it from me. But, yeah, I really love this book. I've read this a couple times also. And it creates this whole world from, like, the beginning to the end, and even though it's told in little vignettes, and it's just so fantastic. Oh my god, I forgot to mention John Green. John Green is my favorite author. I don't have any books from him in this room because I was going to go downstairs and get An Abundance of Catherines, but, I'd forgotten. So I'm just gonna mention him, and he's fantastic, and I agree with Marielle that you should start with Paper Towns, although I also agree with Marielle that The Fault in Our Stars is looking to be the new favorite. I pre-ordered it, and it's going to get a signed copy, and I'm so excited. Next, speaking of John Green, his classmate from college, Ransom Riggs, wrote this book, Miss Peregrine's Home for Peculiar Children. It was a pretty good book, and it's the start of a series that I think is only going to get better and better. And it uses photography as sort of a motif, not in that characters in the book actually take pictures, but it uses these really strange pictures that people have just found, like weird photo collectors, which is apparently a thing, have found, and Ransom Riggs talked to a bunch of these people, and he was able to use their photos for his book, and he was able to sort of, I think he might have written the story around the photos, but I'm not completely sure about that, but it's really well done, and I really like the book. There are so many other books I like. This is just a few. The first ones, the ones I could carry into the den from my bookshelf. Like, I also like the Percy Jackson series, and there are also books from the library that I don't even have that I really like. And I didn't mention any of my required reading that I've had over the years, because most of that's required, and I don't really like it, especially after the 7th grade English curriculum, which was god-awful. But instead, but there are some books I like that have been required, like The Great Gatsby, and brain fart, The Catcher in the Rye. And those are just a couple of the books that I've read for school that I've actually liked. And The Once and Future King is another one. And I don't have a copy of that one, but it was really good. The second time I read The Sword and the Stone, it was a little slow and dense, but the rest of the stories in that book are so good. The Queen of Air and Darkness tells about Arthur's first years as king, which I sort of thought was more interesting than Arthur's childhood. And The Ill-Made Knight, and it was also a pretty funny story. It told about the brothers Gawain, or I guess they'd be the brothers Orkney, that's what they're usually called, because that's Gawain and his brothers, children of Lot, king of Orkney, and Morgause, queen of Orkney, and I guess also Air and Darkness, as the title suggests. And it also has this great side story, and it has that story, and also it has the stories of Arthur when he was first king. And aside from both of those, it has this great subplot, very Shakespearean style, about Pellinore and Palamedes, and I feel like there was another person, but I can't remember who, just having this really ridiculous, silly adventure. And the story about the brothers Gawain, or the brothers Orkney, really sort of leads to A Candle in the Wind, which is the third part of this book. And it's just this melancholy tale of the death of Arthur and the fall of Camelot, and Mordred turning evil, and it's so sad. And in between those two is the Ill-Made Knight, which is just tells a really great story. It's from the point of view of Lancelot, but a lot of it is also about the Grail quest, and it's just, this book is really good. I forgot how good it was until I realized I was going on and on about it. So yeah, you should read that and all the books I mentioned. And I will see you next Friday, I guess. But I'll see you before you see me. You'll see me next Friday. I'll see you on your respective day. Unless you're just a viewer, in which case You know what, this video is too long already, but I am not apologizing for that because I do that. I apologize for it way too much, but I'm just gonna end it right here. Good.